We're beginning a new series. It's called Questions Jesus Asked. So every week you'll come in and you'll be posed with a new question here at the back of the stage. This morning is Has No One Condemned You? And so it'll be a 6-week series leading us all the way through the Lenten fasting season, which begins on Wednesday night, and it will lead us all the way up to Easter. Okay, so it's very exciting. We'll deal with the last question that Jesus asked, at least in this series anyway. Jesus asked a lot of questions that I'm getting ready to talk about. And so what I want to do is just kind of build this tension that Jesus asked these people these questions. But then I'm going to ask you ultimately that you would resolve that tension by asking yourself, pretending like you're that person, basically, and putting yourselves into those shoes so that Jesus can ask you the same questions that he asked those people. And so it's exciting. I love this particular purview, and these are some of the greatest, most rich parts of Scripture that we're going to deal with this morning. So there's a man named Steve Saccone who is a leadership guru and educational guru. He's skilled in pedagogy. And he says that he was doing a study one time on the questions that Jesus asked in the Bible. And this is what he found. He said that his findings were that there were 87 questions that Jesus asked in the book of Matthew. If that's not enough, there's 129 that Jesus asked in the book of Luke. In his research now, he says that it's funny, almost paradoxic to him that Jesus asked all these questions, right? He's the Son of God. He doesn't need more information, right? But he's asking people questions constantly over and over again. So if you look throughout all 4 Gospels, I've seen this confirmed by more than one theologian, that Jesus asked more than 307 questions in 4 Gospels. 307 questions. The questions Jesus asked are important. And at the end of the day, questions matter. They're strategic of any relationship. That if it's going to work, then dialogue is better than monologue. Okay, as a side note, this is one of the reasons why I believe prayer is so very important. Because God speaks to us through His Word and through the Spirit, and we have to reply back in prayer. And it becomes dialogue to God. And some of you know what a one-sided relationship is like, I'm sure, and it's not very fun to deal with that. So Steve goes on to say, he says that people cannot distinguish the difference between being heard and feeling loved. That honestly, if you would examine it even in your own life, if you are being heard by someone, then you feel loved. In the same way with your wife or your husband, I'm sure. Many times in my life, I've experienced this, that my wife will tell me about something that she's troubling her or going on, and then I'll just try to fix it and try to, give answers and solutions to it. And then she yells at me and says, "That's not what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to just listen to me and hear what I'm saying," okay? The idea is that there is a thoughtful side of listening and asking questions to our entire lives. Now, I've been understanding this the best that I can. I have 3 boys, 1 daughter, and a wife. So the boys, outweigh the girls in our household. And some people, it's the opposite way around. And I'm sure that's an interesting journey, no doubt. The other day, right? The other day, Whitney comes to me, and this is the first time I've experienced this. She's 3 years old, right? She comes to me, she grabs my hand, she says, "Dada, come on, we need to talk. We need to talk." And she grabs me and she takes me outside onto the back porch, and we sit down on the picnic table, and she starts talking. And I'm thinking, all right, I got this. You know what I mean? I'm going to be a good dad, and I'm going to listen to everything that she has to say. And I just kind of listened actively and, nodded my head and said, "Oh, yeah, okay, did all those active listening type of things and to showing that I was present and listening to her. And then I thought the conversation was pretty much over at that point in time. And so I had to go back inside. I got up and walked back inside, and then all of a sudden she runs after me and grabs me and says, No, we're not done yet. Now it's your turn to talk." So we had to go back outside and sit back down, and then I had to talk to her. And so, it was a stark difference for me because, with the boys, they come home from school and you're like, "How was school today?" "Good." "What'd you do today?" "I don't remember." That's it. The whole conversation. That's all they needed to convey to me. Yet, it's much different in the female perspective. And the truth is that listening and asking questions, intentional questions, makes people feel loved. And I think this is Jesus' MO, essentially. That he knew that people, that if he would listen to what their troubles were in life, listen to what was going on with them, that he could help them to feel loved by asking thoughtful questions that often cut to the heart of the issue. Intentional and thoughtful questions. If you put yourselves into these narratives that we will look at throughout this series and let Jesus ask you these same questions, that essentially it's setting yourself up for an encounter with Jesus. You're entering into the text to relate to Jesus himself. So use your imagination. Imagine Jesus standing in front of you. Imagine he's asking you the question that we're going to ask you each week. Put yourself in the shoes of a person standing before Jesus to answer the questions Jesus asked. Because essentially life should be this dynamic back and forth relationship with Jesus. Christianity is not meant to be a stagnant, one-sided conversation. Okay? In fact, scripturally, as we look into the scripture, there's this okayness for being wrong when you answer Jesus' questions. Because usually when somebody answered Jesus' question wrong, it panned out for them very well, and they had an encounter with Jesus. When they answered Jesus' questions right, that's usually when things went the wrong way, because they were trying to do things incorrectly. So let's look at the text today as we enter into it. In John chapter 8, verses 2 through 11. I'm going to read from the NIV this morning. John chapter 8, verses 2 through 11. It says this: At dawn, he appeared again to the temple courts, meaning Jesus, where all the people were gathered around him. And he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses, it commanded us to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say?" And they were using this question to trap Jesus in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. And when they had kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw the stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, and then the only Jesus was left, and the woman still standing there. And Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" That's our question today. Has no one condemned you? "No one, sir," she replied. "And then neither do I condemn you." And Jesus declared, "Go now and leave your life of sin." You know what's interesting about this passage is that Jesus is interested in what you have to say. That's maybe the dynamic of Christianity that sets it apart from maybe many other world religions. But I will warn you something about encountering Jesus, and it's this: that often Jesus' questions that he replies to being asked questions are much like this mirror right here. They have this unbelievable effect to be able to turn... Sorry, am I blinding you? I didn't think about the lights. They have this unbelievable effect to maybe be able to look right into your soul and cut to the deepest part of who you are. And it's uncomfortable sometimes to answer Jesus' questions. So throughout this series, I'm going to leave this up here. Hopefully it won't blind you. Is that blinding anybody right now? And I think it'll help us to understand with the fullness of what Jesus is trying to say to us. In the church world, we call this conviction, where you're faced with a question and we're staring our souls right in our face. And so let me explain it this way. The most time that I feel like I need to lose a few pounds is when I'm in the presence of somebody, that's skinnier than I am. And so you're standing next to them in a conversation, and automatically, unconsciously, you're sort of sucking in your gut a little bit. You know what I mean? Yeah, how you doing, man? And nice to meet you, or whatever. Somebody really good looking, it's the same thing. You feel kind of small in their presence a little bit. Or perhaps somebody that, keeps really good shape of their body, and they're buff, and, all of a sudden you just unconsciously, you sort of just puff your chest out a little bit. Yeah, hey man, how's it going? That we have this a feeling that when we're around perfection or around Jesus, that our weaknesses are exposed, and we sort of begin to look at ourselves in the mirror of God's own experience. And it motivates us to change, to be more like Jesus. That's why Jesus, one reason I believe Jesus asks us these questions over and over again. And so perhaps the most troubling part about this entire narrative is that the accusers of this dear woman are actually half true. They're actually right in what they're saying. The law of Moses, the Pharisees and the scribes that accuse this lady and bring her before them, that they're correct, but only halfway correct. It looks like Jesus is not only out to save this woman's soul, but I believe that he's actually out to defend the injustice against women. Okay, because the Old Testament law said that not only the woman should be stoned if they're caught in the act of adultery, but also the male should be stoned if he is caught in the act of adultery. So the very beginning, we see an absolute injustice happening. That women in that first century society, in a patriarchal society, were treated more like property things than they were actually human beings. And so from the very start, Jesus is defending the weak and the marginalized. From the very beginning, Jesus is defending the women, the unjust treatment of women. And haven't all of us have been in a situation like this before at some point in our life? Somebody caught you in the act of sin, of wrongdoing, doing something wrong. Something that wrecks relationships and causes strife. One of the big three kind of crept up behind you and smacked you in the head. You know, the big three being money, sex, and power. One of those three areas came up, crept up behind you, and the Bible calls this sin in every way. It amazes me to realize that as I raise children, that you sort of become a student of developmental psychology in children's lives, basically. And so my children, all three of them, it was amazing to me, and I'm watching it happen all over again. They hit about 1 year old or a little less, and all of a sudden you can see that they're devious in nature. Every one of them. This is our fourth one, and we see it over and over again. I can look at Wilson, and I can know that he feels guilty because he's got a quarter in his mouth or something like that. Okay? Or you can walk into the bathroom and know that he's got his hand down in the toilet or something like that. And as soon as you walk in, you say, "What are you doing?" Boom, that hand goes out of the toilet. You know what I'm saying? Or a piece of candy that they know they shouldn't have, that they didn't ask for or whatever. Immediately, that candy wrapper gets hidden behind the back. I mean, it's amazing to me. We call this in the church world conviction or guilt or whatever. That's this idea that there's something not quite right with us, that we all know that there's something deep within us that has gone wrong. And it's necessary for us to change. Why else would we want to hide things if we didn't feel wrong around them? There's a lot happening in this text that I think we have to look at deeply. The condemning of this woman by the scribes and the Pharisees leaves a woman with no hope whatsoever. I mean, it's absolute what we call the word condemnation. I mean, she's done. She deserves death. She's dead. There's no hope for her whatsoever. If Jesus lets her off, okay, this is maybe the deeper side of it, then he's going to be perceived as soft on crime and that he doesn't really care or respect the law of Moses. There's the first issue right there. But if he lets these men stone the woman, the poor lady will die. It's unjust because the man is not dying too, and that actually he would be breaking Roman law because it was reserved only for the Roman government that they could execute people. So by law, they were unallowed, or the Jewish people were not allowed to condemn anybody or to stone anyone and kill them. What perhaps I think is the best approach is done by Jesus here, like the scribes and the Pharisees. You know, they come to Jesus, and any time that you're trying to trap Jesus in anything or try to justify yourself in some ways, it's always going to go bad for you. Every time, no matter what you do. At the end of the day, what's happening is that they're trying to mold Jesus into their own image. Okay? And so this is where you get weird things happening in life and society, even in the Christian community. That's where you get T-shirts that say, like, Jesus is my homeboy, you know what I mean, or something like that. It's where you get weird things like, I saw this the other day. There was a picture of Jesus. It was the Sacred Heart of Jesus, a Catholic icon. And that normally they have the benediction. You've seen it in Catholic images, I'm sure, where they hold their three fingers up together like this. And essentially that means benediction. It means peace or grace and blessing to you. Well, somebody photoshopped the joint right in between his two fingers. You know what I mean? Like, it's Colorado, right? Everybody's smoking, okay? And so the idea is that, they've molded the Jesus that they want. And that's the God that they worship. They take everything that Jesus is and use it for their own means in a different and perverted way. You know that you've recreated Jesus in your own image when Jesus hates everybody you hate and does all the things that you do. When that happens, you know that you've recreated Jesus in your own image. The other side of that pendulum is this image of God standing up there in heaven with an iron scepter. And the moment that you forget to recycle or you litter or you color outside the lines, that he's going to smack you with his iron scepter. See, there's a balance somehow between. And the balance is only in the revelation of Jesus Christ and who he is. Do you really want to know God? Do you really want to know who Jesus is? Then you've got to marinate yourselves in these biblical passages of Jesus. And this is part of that activity right now. And so this story, we don't get either one of those things. We don't get little buddy Jesus and we don't get the iron fist Jesus. Here we get a third option, that Jesus reveals himself. He does this twice. He diffuses the entire situation by leaning down and writing on the ground. I mean, I love this. This is just absolute genius. Next time somebody comes hot and heavy into me and yelling and mad and say, you got to do a justice, I'm just going to lean down and start playing with dirt or something like that, or a stick. I mean, in my mind, I like to imagine that Jesus, because it says twice that he leans down and begins writing in the sand. I like to imagine Jesus is drawing a picture of a kitty cat or something like that in the sand, And he looks down the second time. He's like, man, my whiskers are all messed up, And he gets back down there and he reproportions them or something like that. The urgency that the scribes and the Pharisees come to with is like, this has to happen now. You can imagine in your mind, first of all, that they're like picking up stones, that they're grabbing stones off the ground and finding them, putting them in piles, ready to stone this woman. And they're right there. I mean, she's in the circle. They're ready to pelt her with rocks. And Jesus just starts writing on the ground. He diffuses the situation. He's not listening to them. Maybe during that time, Jesus is asking God. Maybe he's praying. Maybe he's asking God in those moments that he would take over the situation. Let this lady free, Lord. Maybe he's asking for wisdom to diffuse the hatred and murderous thoughts of these men that have been brought forth against the weak and the marginalized and those trapped in sin. Isn't it interesting in this whole story that Jesus is not concerned at all about the religious people? He's concerned about the guilty people. I mean, isn't that interesting? It's not the righteous religious people, the scribes and the Pharisees, the teachers. It's not the ones that know what the law says. It's the ones that violated the law. That's the ones he's concerned about. This is in our entire, I feel like, MO of New Harvest in so many ways. I'm really not concerned about you as much as I'm concerned about the lost people out there and what we can do all together to reach those lost people out there. And you may think that that's a bad way to pastor, and it may be, but that's what Jesus did. And so I want to be like Jesus in much way as I possibly can. Now, don't take that take that with a grain of salt. I do love you guys, and I care about you in every way. But I care more about them because you're saved. You're saved already. At the end of the day, you're going to heaven, right? They're not, okay? That's why I'm here, all right? Okay? After Jesus paused in writing for a time, he stands up and he says the words, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw the stone at her." Okay, in one brief statement, this is amazing wisdom. In one brief statement, Jesus upholds the Mosaic law of execution and then also at the same time ensures that the woman will not be executed. He did both. I mean, that's absolute genius if you look at it from that perspective. Look what he did. He says, yes, stone her. But the procedure that we're going to use for stoning this woman is going to start out with the person who has no sin. Genius. And then he goes on writing in the sand again, putting his whiskers on his kitty cat or something like that, or drawing a pig or whatever he was doing. And one by one, while Jesus is writing, the people walk away. And it says from the oldest to the youngest. Perhaps maybe because the older were more wise and they realized what Jesus had just said. Maybe because the older people have more sin than the younger people and they realized that and they walked away. Because they've taken the time to look at themselves and realize that no person on earth is qualified to condemn another person. See what Jesus' question just did? You see what his statement just said? It makes us look deeply into each other's souls, into our own souls, by his questioning. No person on earth is at liberty, is able to condemn another person. So finally, the woman trapped in sin is left alone with Jesus. Only Jesus is left, and he is the only one that can condemn her of sin. Now, I want you to stop right here and grasp the fullness of this question. Jesus stands up and asks the woman the question, 2 power-packed questions. Woman, where are they? All of the accusers are gone at this point in time. It's just her and Jesus. Has no one condemned you? That's the question we're going to ask ourselves today. Jesus has fundamentally forbid all earthly condemnation. We are all sinners and can no longer condemn any other sinners, and no one else can condemn you either. Do you realize the statement that Jesus just made? What he's speaking to us. Suddenly, every voice of condemnation is put to silence in your life. Maybe it's school, maybe it's media, maybe it's work, maybe it's social media, maybe it's your faith community, maybe it's our church, maybe it's someone in our church, maybe it's somebody in another church that's condemned you for something in your life. Silenced in the presence of Jesus. You have no ability, and they have no ability to condemn you for anything. The only voice that counts is Jesus' voice. So stop listening to them. Voices of condemnation, voices that have come against you in life, just stop listening to them. No person on earth can condemn you. And Jesus takes a step further and forgoes all heavenly condemnation too, when he says the words, "Neither do I condemn you." Rather than condemn the woman as a sinner for all time, he explains why he doesn't condemn this woman by saying these words, "Now go and leave your life of sin." That's why he can say that. Because he knows that only Jesus can cause this radical change in this woman's life. No other person can do it. The only thing that the law offers is death. Just kill it. Just kill the evil. In my office, I struggle with this many, many times, and I've written a syllogism, and I'm going to check it out next week with Dr. Davis, who is a philosopher and a scholar, and he's also skilled in logic, not as much as myself by any means. And so I'm going to ask him about this particular syllogism. I have it written on my post-it notes on my desk on my computer. And it goes something like this. I've refined it over the years. It goes ultimately like this. Evil is a human attribute. Humans cannot kill attributes. So thus the conclusion would be, evil cannot be killed by killing humans. Evil cannot be killed by killing humans. That would be I don't know if it's 100% sound, but I think Jesus is essentially saying the same thing here. The Pharisees and the scribes thought that they could eliminate evil from the nation of Israel by just simply killing the woman. And Jesus says, no. You cannot condemn people like that and expect for evil to be expunged from the earth, or people that practice evil. Evil is still present. I believe that Jesus was showing us that the only way to eliminate evil is by eliminating with the power of Jesus Christ and by the words of Jesus Christ. If you want evil to be banished from the world, if you want to stop having to turn on the television and see evil and murders and rapes and everything else that happens in society, then start using the words of Jesus on a regular basis. Proclaim to the world, preach to the world His words. That's how Jesus did it. That's how He eliminated evil. Everything Jesus said pointed towards hope, transformation, and redemption, and not towards death and condemnation. Everything that He said. The other side of that, the contrast, the Pharisees and the scribes, kill her. That was their solution. Cut them off. kill her. She's not worth it. Jesus says something different about us. Ryan, you can come. There's something very important to realize here. And that's the difference between two very churchy words that we use on a regular basis. One is condemnation and the other is conviction. They both start with a C. Don't get them confused. One's condemnation and one is conviction. Condemnation is none of our business, so don't even worry about that word, okay? Don't even worry about it. It's not for you. However, conviction is different. Remember how Jesus' words have this mirroring effect into our souls. Conviction is different in that Jesus can ask you a question and put his finger right on the very issue that you're dealing with. Right on the very deepest, darkest, blackest part of your soul. He can reach down with his finger and one question and boom, he's got it. And you can feel the pain of it. That's conviction. That's the feeling of guilt. I know that I'm wrong. I know that I shouldn't do that. The beauty of this is that God loves me enough not to just leave me where I am. Not just leave me as a sinner, but to take me somewhere. To move me on in life. And every single person must acknowledge that I am not who I am called to be yet. There's this tension of who I am and who I need to be and who God is calling me to be. And then even more tension on top of that is the fact that there's part of me held up in eternity. That I am not fully yet who I shall be in the future. That my body is wearing out and wasting away, but one day I'll have the body that I was designed for. Incorruptible, imperishable. And I'll be raised to that one day in the future. So Christianity and all that it is not so much about who you are right now, but it's who you are becoming throughout time. That's Christianity in a nutshell. So all of us must acknowledge this. That's that convicting power of Jesus. And so we're being molded and shaped into the most perfect image of the perfect person who ever walked the face of the earth. And if Jesus doesn't condemn anybody, then certainly you shouldn't be condemning anybody either. Rather than call people to live a life of freedom, call them to live a life where they no longer live in sin. That's what we do. We give them the words of Jesus. So what's that look like contextually? How do I apply that to people's lives? Well, maybe say it like this. Well, this time, center God in your finances and you won't have the trouble of foreclosure and debt and agony anymore. Maybe now this time, stop walking over your coworkers and your spouse and your children and remember to regard others above yourself. Maybe this time, make this marriage work out because God's the center of your life and of your marriage. And this time, you aren't the center of your life and of your marriage. Maybe that's how we apply it. Maybe it's like, okay, the past is the past. You're not condemned for that. I don't condemn you. I can't condemn you. Jesus said he wasn't going to condemn you. So now, let's move on in life. And let's see what God will do. Paul said it this way, I forget what is behind and I stretch forward to what is next. Keep in mind, he's the murderer, right? He put Christians in prison. I've never put anybody in prison. I've been to prison, but never put anybody in prison. You see the idea? It's this radical change in life that God wants for us. So now I want everybody to close their eyes. Keep this mirror in mind during this time, because we're going to ask ourselves the question this morning. Just, if you would, imagine for a moment that you're there and Jesus is there and all these people accusing you are there. And Jesus asked the question, has no one condemned you? Imagine yourself being surrounded by the voices that condemned you in your life. Voices that tried to define you. You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. You're a sinner. What you did was unforgivable. You hurt me too bad this time. You know the voices that have been said to you over and over again, voices of condemnation, that there's no hope left at the end of the sentence. And then you know also the words that the enemy speaks too, that sound a whole lot like it. You're never going to be good enough. You're always going to fail. You're never going to do it right. Now imagine every single one of them dropping their stones and walking away. Every voice that's ever said that to you, who's ever condemned you, to drop their stones and walk away, never to return again. Where are they? Has no one condemned you? Immediately the freedom of Jesus comes. Now, as we meditate upon that, there's one other thing I want you to do. Every single person in this room has condemned someone else. Whether you meant to do it purposely, whether you did it unconsciously, accidentally, in a fit of rage or anger, you've condemned somebody. It's just common to human life. We like to cut people down. Sometimes to make ourselves feel better, and other times we like to do it just because we're mad and angry about the hurt that we felt. Keeping your eyes closed, imagine yourself standing around somebody, maybe more than one person, that you've condemned before. Somebody you've said those words to that we just talked about. Now remember Jesus' statement. Let any one of you who is without sin throw the first stone. Now picture yourself, from the oldest to the youngest, dropping the stone and walking away. Dropping the stone and walking away. Now we can live a life free of condemnation of others, and we can truly hear the words, go now and leave your life of sin. Go now and leave your life of sin.